Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. In the vast catalogue of extraterrestrial encounters, most reports follow familiar patterns: abductions, medical examinations, or mysterious lights in the sky. These encounters can leave witnesses traumatized with partial or complete memory loss, and often involve ongoing surveillance by the otherworldly visitors. However, among these accounts exists a remarkably different kind of encounter, one so unusual and seemingly pointless that it stands apart from traditional cases, challenging our understanding of extraterrestrial intentions and behaviour. On the night of November 2nd, 1967, a remarkable event occurred on a quiet stretch of Highway 26 just outside Ririe, Idaho. What began as a routine drive home would become one of the most peculiar close encounters in UFO history, distinguished by its almost mundane yet deeply bizarre nature. The incident would later be classified by NICAP, that's National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, as a CE3, close encounter of the third kind, and what some researchers, based on the witnesses' descriptions of the craft, would come to call a Dyad scout craft incident. At approximately 9:30 p.m, two Native American youths, Guy Tossi and Will Begay, were travelling south on an otherwise deserted rural road. The night was dark and quiet, typical for this remote stretch of Idaho highway, when the evening took an extraordinary turn. Without warning, a sudden and intense flash of light materialized before their vehicle, immediately followed by the abrupt appearance of what could only be described as an unidentified flying object. The craft that materialized was modest in size but precisely engineered. Approximately 8 feet in width, with a 6-foot diameter and roughly 3 feet in height, its most striking feature was a series of alternating green and orange lights that flashed around its rim in a mesmerizing pattern. The lower portion of the craft appeared to rotate as it hovered, and witnesses observed that the underside of the UFO shifted between orange and green hues that matched the flashing rim lights. Most notably, it featured a transparent dome at its top, within which 2 small-statured figures were clearly visible. Below the craft, observers noted a bright yellow light that behaved similarly to flames, creating a flickering effect that cast strange shadows across the rural landscape. The full brunt of their encounter began when their vehicle came to an inexplicable stop. Begay, who was behind the wheel, would later testify that he had not applied the brakes. In fact, his foot remained firmly on the accelerator as the car gradually lost power, as if some external force had taken control of the vehicle's systems. The UFO positioned itself approximately 5 feet above the highway directly in front of them, bathing the surrounding area in an intense, almost supernatural green light that transformed the familiar Idaho landscape into something surreal and unsettling. What happened next would push the limits of believability, even by the standards of UFO encounters. The glass dome atop the craft lifted upward on what appeared to be a sophisticated hinge system, and one of its occupants emerged into the night air. The being, approximately 3.5 feet in height, appeared to float down from the craft, demonstrating complete mastery over gravity itself. Its appearance was striking and unmistakably alien. Bright green skin marked by heavy wrinkles, pitting, and creases that witnesses likened to the texture of a cantaloupe. The entity possessed small, round black eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, large pointed ears that stood high on its head, and a straight, slit-like mouth set in an oval face. Its hairless head and unusual features were complemented by what appeared to be a tight-fitting suit reminiscent of diver's gear, suggesting some form of protective equipment. Most remarkably, both witnesses noted that the entity possessed only 2 fingers on each hand, a detail that would seem to rule out any possibility of the entity being human in origin. On its back was an unusual pack or container that extended above and behind its head, though its purpose remained unclear. In what could only be described as an otherworldly carjacking, the being approached the driver's side door with deliberate purpose. Without hesitation, it opened the door and took position behind the wheel, demonstrating an awareness of human vehicle operations that raised as many questions as it answered. Tossie and Bigay, perhaps paralysed by fear or shock, or possibly under some form of control, found themselves pushing over to the passenger side, giving their extraterrestrial hitchhiker full access to the driver's seat. The vehicle began to move without the engine being restarted, though whether under the entity's direct control or towed by some invisible force from the UFO remains a matter of speculation to this day. The craft maintained a consistent position several feet ahead of the car as it was driven into a nearby wheat field, making several jerky motions that witnesses attributed either to the being's inexperience with human vehicle or the possible towing effect of the craft. When the vehicle finally came to rest approximately 75 feet from its original position, Tossie made a decision that would split the witnesses' experiences into two distinct narratives. He seized the opportunity to flee, bolting from the passenger side door and making a desperate quarter-mile run to the farmhouse of Willard Hammond. During his escape, he reported being pursued by a bright light, presumably wielded by the second occupant of the craft. Tossie arrived at the Hammond residence in such a state of distress that he could barely articulate what had transpired, his words coming out in confused bursts as he attempted to explain the inexplicable ordeal to the bewildered farmer and his family. Meanwhile, Bigay remained in the vehicle, seemingly frozen in a state between shock and fascination. The entity turned to face him and attempted what appeared to be communication, producing a series of high-pitched, rapid vocalizations that Bigay would later describe as reminiscent of a woman or a bird. These sounds, while unintelligible to human ears, clearly seemed to be an attempt at language rather than random noise, suggesting an intelligence behind the seemingly bizarre behaviour. The second entity, having abandoned its pursuit of Tossie, returned to the vehicle at this point. Both beings then lifted off the ground in the same gravity-defying manner that they had displayed earlier and descended back into their craft, which sealed its dome before departing in a distinctive zigzag pattern into the night sky. The entire incident lasted approximately 15 minutes. When Willard Hammond and his family, after managing to calm the severely shaken Tossie, returned to the scene, they found Bigay still in the vehicle, his eyes tightly shut, nearly speechless with fear. The car's engine was running, and all its lights were illuminated. Hammond, ensuring the young man's safety, followed them home in his own vehicle before stopping in at a local bar. There he told a county deputy sheriff about this strange incident, and shortly after, both Tossie and Bigay arrived independently at the same establishment. They voluntarily provided their statements to the officer, with their separate accounts matching in detail. This spontaneous corroboration led to the involvement of the state police, who launched a formal investigation. Corporal Tom Harper of the Idaho State Police met with the witnesses at the scene, conducting a thorough examination of both the car and the surrounding area for traces of radiation, though no definitive evidence was found beyond the visible path the car had carved through the wheat field. As news of the incident spread, corroborating evidence began to emerge from the surrounding community. Local farmers reported unusual lights in the sky that evening, and several noted bizarre behaviour among their livestock, a common occurrence in close encounter cases. Most notably, Mrs. Claude Mann reported that her cattle had become inexplicably agitated and stampeded through a steel pipe fence, fleeing from the area where the craft was sighted. Even after the animals were rounded up and the fence repaired, they broke through it again in their apparent panic, suggesting a level of terror that went beyond normal animal behaviour. The case eventually drew the attention of NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, who dispatched researcher C.R. Ricks from Idaho Falls to conduct a thorough investigation. During his inquiry, Ricks uncovered another witness who reported a similar encounter the same night, adding another layer of credibility to the original accounts. This individual, who insisted on anonymity, described a craft of identical description landing before their vehicle, with a small being approaching and tapping on their windshield. While this witness was reluctant to discuss the details of their encounter, they confirmed the basic elements of their experience to RICS, providing independent verification of the unusual events of that night. A local resident named Elaine Quinn also reported seeing a UFO zigzagging through the sky that same night, providing additional verification of unusual aerial activity in the area. This sighting particularly corresponded with the distinctive flight pattern described by Tossi and Begay as the craft departed, suggesting that multiple witnesses had observed the same phenomena from different vantage points. The Ririe incident stands as one of the most unusual documented cases in UFO history, distinguished by several unique characteristics that set it apart from more traditional encounters. Unlike typical accounts of extraterrestrial encounters involving medical examinations or abductions, this case presents what appears to be an act of simple curiosity, albeit one that left a lasting mark on its witnesses and the community of Ririe, Idaho. The apparent interest of these beings in human transportation technology, demonstrated through their brief commandeering of the vehicle, suggests a different kind of extraterrestrial encounter than those typically reported. The seemingly purposeless nature of the encounter, the absence of any harmful actions towards the witnesses, and the almost playful quality of the being's behaviour challenge our traditional understanding of alien motivations. While most reported encounters suggest scientific or experimental objectives, the Ririe incident seems more akin to joyriding than research, raising intriguing questions about the nature and purpose of these potential extraterrestrial visitors. Despite the passage of time, the Ririe incident remains one of the great unsung cases in ufology, often overshadowed by more widely publicised encounters such as the Pascagoula incident or the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. Unlike these cases of medical examinations or specimen collection, the bizarre spectacle of aliens apparently taking a human vehicle for what amounts to little more than a joyride sets this case apart. It suggests that not all extraterrestrial interactions are driven by ominous scientific purposes, but might sometimes stem from simple curiosity about human technology. Several theories have emerged to explain the events of that night. The first and most straightforward theory is that the witnesses generally encountered extraterrestrial beings who, for reasons unknown, chose to experiment with the human vehicle. This theory is supported by the multiple witness accounts, including those of Quinn and the anonymous witnesses who reported similar encounters, as well as the usual behaviour of local livestock. A more sceptical theory suggests that the entire incident was fabricated by Tossi and Begay to avoid legal or disciplinary consequences. According to this perspective, the young men had been drinking and crashed their vehicle into the wheat field. Rather than face potential consequences for driving while intoxicated, they concocted an elaborate story about the alien carjackers. This theory, however, struggles to account for the corroborating witnesses and the widespread reports of unusual phenomena in the area that night. The skeptical interpretation particularly fails to explain the independent account of the anonymous witness who reported a similar encounter to C.R. Ricks, as well as Elaine Quinn's sighting of the zigzagging UFO. The presence of these additional witnesses, who had nothing to gain from supporting Tossi and Begay's account, lends credibility to the extraordinary events described. Critics of the account have pointed to the craft's reported zigzag flight pattern as evidence against this credibility, noting that such a trajectory would be wildly impractical and inefficient for any sensible form of air travel. However, the craft's apparent anti-gravitational capabilities, demonstrated by its precise hovering and the being's ability to float to and from the ground, suggest technology that could potentially alter or redirect inertia instantaneously. Under such circumstances, what seems like an impractical flight path through the lens of conventional aerodynamics might be perfectly feasible for a craft operating under entirely different physical principles. The Ririe incident remains an intriguing case in UFO history. Whether the encounter was genuine or fabricated, it challenges conventional assumptions about the nature and purpose of extraterrestrial contact, suggesting that some encounters might be motivated by nothing more complex than curiosity about human behaviour and technology.